Hello and welcome back to this series of tutorials where I created a metal song using all virtual instruments. Today we're going to get into the sequencing and the lead guitar aspect, which I know a lot of people are desperate to know about. So I promise we're going to dig into this, and we're going to also use some real world examples to show how and why I do the things that I do in this example. One thing that I want to show first is some shreddage specific setup. Now, depending on the virtual guitar that you're using, you may not be able to do these things, or you may have already done them, but I want to show how you would do it. And this is how I like to set up my lead guitars for ease of performance and sequencing. So for the purposes of this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new instance of Shreddage 3 Rogue. I'm going to keep the existing one there, but we're going to mute it, and I'm just going to make this the new active one. Okay. So we're going to go to snapshots, and I'm going to pull up the metal lead 2, which was the preset I used. So what are the setup things I'm talking about? Well, for one thing, we're going to turn multi-tracking off. We don't need it, so turn off the second guitar. Leads are usually mono. Now what we're going to do is take a look at the articulations tab and set this up the way I like to do it, using a mix of velocity and key switches. So by going here, by default, sustain will go to a rake at high velocities. So if I take a note, that's kind of low. And if I go higher, that kind of sound at the beginning is a rake. It's raking across the strings when it hits that note. And then at max velocity, 127, we've got a pinch harmonic. This is all default and out of the box. We're going to change how legato is triggered. Hammer on and pull off, we're going to make this into 20, starting at a minimum of 20 velocity. Then for slide, we're actually going to take out the key switch rule, just use velocity and make it 1 to 19. So what should happen now is if I play hard, I get a hammer on, but if I play soft, we get a nice sounding slide. With the slide settings as well, let's take a look at the sound tab. Right now, it's set to a lower speed, which is pretty good for what we're going to be doing here. And basically, when you have realistic volume on, that means that as the note lasts longer, the slide that follows it will be softer. So we want to leave that the same. And then the other thing we're going to do, let's just compare to my existing patch to show how I have it set up. We're going to put mutes at 20 to 59. So this way, rather than using a key switch for mutes, we're going to set this to key switch C-1. So it's exactly the same as sustain, but we're going to add a velocity rule and make that 20. And then this one is going to be 60 to 119. So basically, if we play really soft, we're going to get slides if we overlap notes. 20 to 59, we're going to get palm mutes. So you hear those are muted notes there. Then if we play louder, we get sustains, and then rakes, and then pinch squeals. So this is a nice way of setting it up. I'm also going to adjust on the sound tab. We're going to take off velocity to volume because for this, I don't need it. We're high gain anyway, so I'd rather just have it kind of be max volume every time. Now on the advanced page, we'll turn on anti-repetition, which basically adds more variation to the notes. And then we're going to turn the shred, window, and offset all the way down. For the purposes of this, it's just not relevant. And then going back to the main tab here, we're just going to turn up the attack. So if I look at my other instance, I had that attack turned up pretty high. So this basically adds more like note on pick sound. So that's pretty much what that's doing. All right, so that is how I configure my lead patches. So I get mutes at the lower velocity. I can overlap notes at a soft velocity to get a slide. And if I do it hard, I get a hammer on. You can hear that the second note is like slightly truncated. That's what a hammer on or pull off sounds like. And then we've got our rakes and pinch harmonics. Those are just left on the default. Now with that out of the way, let's play the lead part again. We're going to start from later in the track, and let's just listen to it once. Nitro, nitro, nitro. Okay, so that is our lead part. Now, the very first thing to think about is how much pitch automation I used. And why did I do that? Well, it's because that's what a real guitarist would do. And to illustrate this, there's a song that actually came out today as of the making of this video. I love this artist. Credit to Game Metal. I'll put a link in the description. Let's listen to just the first 25 seconds of this track. It's a really high energy remix from Final Fantasy IV. Okay, so if you were watching and listening carefully, there was not one note, not a single note, except for the very short transition notes in the melody that was not articulated in some way. So he was constantly using pitch bends and vibrato and, sliding from one note to another. And so if you want your lead mockups to sound realistic in your virtual metal productions and rock, you have to do the same thing. So I'm going to show specifically what I did. So just to illustrate, for example, he had a high G, right? So it wasn't this. You hear how just dead and lifeless that sounds? Instead, he did like a slow bend up to the note, right? Like. And the way I did that, I'm on my MIDI controller, I'm just pushing up. I'm starting at an F. He went up to a G, starting at an F. And pushing it up. Now, depending on the guitarist's technique, you can either do vibrato by bending the string, or you can use a whammy bar. So the way to do that in Shreddage would be to use the mod wheel for vibrato. You can do that on F, you can do it on G. If we click on the little gear icon next to vibrato amount, you can see how this is done. It's either emulated or fingered. Sometimes there's like fingered heavy or light. Sometimes we recorded a whammy vibrato. But the point is, by default, this is linked to mod wheel. So if you want to do a pitch bend and get vibrato, then this is how you would do it. And then that speed, of course, can be adjusted as well. This adjusts the sample playback. So looking at my vibrato, though, you'll see I used some mod wheel on a few different notes, but by and large, so this would be an example one here. Let's play it without anything else. So when would you use one and not the other? Usually my preference is to do manual vibrato, which is just hitting the pitch wheel really, really fast. So like this. And if you want to do slow vibrato, right, you just do it slower. Or you can do it really fast. I find the original Native Instruments Complete Control series keyboards to be the best for this because you literally just tap. You don't have to push anything. But let's say that you don't have a keyboard at all and you just want to automate this stuff. So I'll explain how to do it. Most DAWs have some kind of automation lane or somewhere where you can just draw in automation. In FL, there's a little bit of a quirk where in the wrapper, you have to make sure that you're setting the max pitch bend range to 12. I don't really know why this is the case. I think it's just an FL thing, but it defaults to 2, so change it to 12. So then what you'll do is right click on that and hit Edit Events. In this case, I already have the event editor open. So if I go to change that view, I'm looking at velocity now. Okay, right click, edit events and piano roll. Let's say I didn't record that at all. So now it's gonna sound pretty flat, right? Not much going on there. What we can do to reproduce the effect that I played in is basically just do a very sharp spike up and then back down again. And we can draw, I feel like Bob Ross. I can draw just a few of these pretty little triangles, and we can see how that sounds and then adjust from there. So that's not too bad, but I think what we want is probably even tighter. So not so much of a downwards, like we're spending too much time bent. When I performed it, we were hitting 0 pretty fast. So it looked kind of more like this. And this is, again, just sort of drawing it in. I'm just drawing it with the mouse, not performing anything. That sounds pretty good too. If we wanted it to be more intense, as we approach this line, this is the full 2 semitones. We could make this a little higher if we wanted to. And the other thing is that we might decide this is too fast, in which case we just draw it a little bit slower. So that's not bad, right? But maybe a little bit slower. Could be more like a little more like this, maybe. It's like a little bit more spaced out. There's not a science to it exactly. It's more like, what is the effect that you want? Because later on in the track, as I'll show you, I used a very fast pitch bend. That is very similar to what I played in. That's probably how I would do it live. So sounds pretty good. You'll see later on though, in the last note, I did really, really fast vibrato to emulate that kind of dive bomb type effect. It's just to show you don't always want to use one set vibrato speed because that will start sounding a little stale over time. Now, another technique that I've used many, many times, and I've talked about it for years in my videos, but it really bears repeating, is those downward slides. Like if we just go back to this video for a second and just listen to how he slides down the neck constantly. You hear those slides at the end of little phrases like down, and sometimes it's so fast you can barely hear it. Doing that in your mock-ups is really important because if we take out these little note endings here, I'm just going to show you what that sounds like in this part of the phrase. You hear how the note endings just sound very sterile. Real guitarists don't just stop playing a note, right? By the way, this is not a slide because it's coming from a pinch harmonic, and you can't slide from a pinch harmonic, at least not in the current version. So now let's hear a little bit later in the song when it gets faster, how I'm using these slides even in a couple short phrases. I'm using 3 slides there, 2 slides down at the end of notes, and then 1 slide up. Now let's hear that in isolation. What would it sound like without those? I mean, we could just extend the notes, right? But it's not going to sound the same. That's not bad, but it just doesn't have the same kind of life. Like again, if we think about Game Metal, what he did when he was playing, there's just lots of these very subtle, sometimes they're so fast you can barely hear them, but they're just all over the place. Now, another thing you'll notice is that because I set up the velocity-based articulation switching, you might think like leads, why would you be using palm mutes for those? Like you're usually doing just sustains and hammer-ons. But what I've observed is that real players don't always hit every note perfectly cleanly. You have to think about how these guitars were sampled. The guitarist basically sat there, they played a note perfectly to get the exact right attack, and then they just wait for it to sustain out. But when you're really playing guitar, your hand isn't perfectly still and you're waiting, 20 seconds between notes. Your hands are moving, strings are getting muted, they're buzzing a little bit. So by using palm mutes interspersed with your sustains, and I'm doing that with the lower velocity notes, that just sounds a little bit more realistic to how somebody would play. And I'm just sort of putting it in between some of the notes. If we don't do that, it'll sound like this. Do you hear how just right away that sounds more robotic? And it's because you're just not going to play perfectly when you're playing any kind of phrase, and especially the higher you get on the neck. So that brings me to the next thing, which is that throughout this performance, I'm changing hand position a little bit manually. Hand position has a major impact on how the phrase starts, right? So let's play that Final Fantasy IV phrase. So that's one way to do it, but if we increase the hand position, and then let's do that lower, the brightness changes pretty dramatically between a low hand position and a high hand position. The lower you are, the longer the notes sustain and the brighter they sound. So it really depends on what you want for your phrase. When I first start out, I have it sort of in the middle, a little bit higher up. And I wanted this specific note, this F5. I just liked the way it sounded with the more aggressive lower hand position. Let's hear what this would sound like in context if I used all high hand positions. Now, that might be what you're looking for. In my case, it doesn't cut through enough. What if we used all low hand positions? Again, pretty good, but that sounded to me like a little too harsh and a little too bright. So that's why changing the hand position, and this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, right? But changing the hand position can give you just a lot more control. I've never felt the need to sequence on specific strings. You can do that in Shreddage 3. You can say, I want to play this note on this string. You can see the key switches for that are at the bottom of the keyboard. But I think just by changing hand position, which is just a single control, that's often just sufficient enough. Now you might be asking, how am I doing this exactly? Well, there's two ways to do it. One way is to right-click on the knob, learn a MIDI CC. So if you have a MIDI controller, you can hook it up to that. Another way to do it is with host automation. So this is going to depend on your DAW. In FL, the way it works is you go to the generator in your project. So we have Rogue here, and then we have our list of all the parameters. And I can just right-click on one, like hand position, and then you can see I'm editing that event already. You could also then link this, if you wanted to, directly to a controller and just bypass doing it in the contact interface. All right, so let's put it all together. I'm gonna play the melodic part again, but this time I'd like you to pay close attention to the MIDI automation and the velocities. In fact, maybe I'll just play it twice so you can hear each time and look at a different view. I want you to pay attention to the velocities to see when I'm using slides, like at the end of phrases, and when I'm using palm mutes. I want you to pay attention to when I'm using pitch bends, which is going to be quite frequently, both pitch bends going up to a note like slow bends versus pitch bends for vibrato, pitch bends via the mod wheel, and then automating hand position. And when you do all these things combined, you can get a very realistic performance. All right, so let's play it back. All right, now let's look at the channel pitch as I play, and I'm going to also swap to the mod wheel view sometimes. A few other things that are worth mentioning about this part. One is that I'm using the unison bend knob. And the way unison bend works is you play two notes like this. And then when you move the knob, the lower pitch is bent up to the higher pitch. And I just automated that the same way here. I think I only did it one time in the song. So that's all that is. It's not a technique you want to overuse, but it does sound cool every now and again. And then later on, we have this just really fast part. Again, I'm not a great keyboardist. What I did was first, I pretty much just played an arpeggiated chord here. So if we look at these notes in a bit more detail, it's just a minor chord, right? And this is the same chord, but it's just a different note at the top to make it a little bit more spicy. And then this is my pretty poor, honestly, live playing, but when you do it fast enough, it does sound just kind of cool. If we were to slow this down, this is not gonna sound good. It's changing the tempo from 169 to 71. But basically, a lot of rock and metal solos, sort of the go-to is pentatonic. So you just do this, right? And then you can add a few more notes in there to make it sound a little more bluesy. If you have the second in there. So when I'm playing like this, because I'm not great, I'm kind of just going to the white notes. And I think I, after the fact, edited a couple of these tritones in there. And that's really all I did. I just sort of played it fast and then cleaned it up a little bit after the fact. It's not particularly amazing in my opinion. A really good keyboardist could play this, I'm sure, way better. But you can see something worth noting is that these aren't all just sustains, because if I did all sustains, what do you think that would sound like? That might be what you want, but for me, I wanted it to sound a little dirty, like the player is not perfectly hitting every note. All right, well, I hope that gives you some insight into how to produce pretty realistic sounding lead parts for rock and metal music. Now, just like with the first video, I put the MIDI file for this in the video description, so you can analyze and break this down yourself. If you have Shreddage 3, you'll be able to just put in that MIDI data and it should work pretty well. I put in the exact Rogue patch. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for many years, so these techniques have taken me time to develop. Don't worry about it if your first virtual guitar solo doesn't sound amazing. This is something that you just practice. You keep doing it. You learn when to use pitch bends, when to use mod wheel, when to use slides down. But one of the best things you can do is just next time you listen to a rock or metal song with like a really great solo or just a really good lead part, ideally if you can watch a live performance or music video and watch what they're doing with their hands, like when are they using vibrato, when are they sliding, or if you watch music videos like the one I just showed, which is like a performance video, you can really get a lot of useful information just absorbing how guitarists play if you pay closer attention to the techniques that they're using. All right, I'll see you in the next one where we're going to get into the rhythm guitar. Later.